The BRICS Summit has begun, and in the BRICS Summit, we are starting to hear some of the most based, radical speeches ever known to man.
And coming from South Africa, that is quite a feat because political speeches here are extremely boring. But thankfully, the BRICS Summit is changing that. So let's go through a few extracts of this particular speech. And at the end of the video, we'll tell you who actually said it.
So apparently, the current world order can be traced to the fall of the Berlin Wall. The collapse of the Soviet Union really kind of led to a global hegemony led by the US.
And according to this particular speech, the hegemonic West managed to impose its neoliberal world order on developing countries and extract a lot of wealth from those countries to the detriment of those countries as well. Sounds very much like South Africa, Byron.
Yes, it does. So, ladies and gentlemen, you may be saying, what exactly has been imposed on us? The global green agenda. As we all currently know, we're experiencing load shedding. Why are we experiencing load shedding? Well, because coal is out of favor. Why is coal out of favor? Well, because the West tells us we should have a green agenda. Carbon neutral, remember? Oh, global warming. Another example would probably be all the pride parades that we're experiencing. South Africa, typically a Christian conservative country where pride and LGBT rights aren't really a common occurrence in this country.
But let us not forget about outcomes-based education, which was an American import. Let us not forget about ESG, Sustainability Development Goals, and all of the other things that retard the development of South Africa. So when the speech says the hegemonic West is able to impose itself on developing countries, this is exactly what she is talking about, and we can actually agree with her in this regard.
The speech goes on a bit further and says, BRICS countries should consume what they manufacture and manufacture what they consume. We completely agree with this because what you typically find in the African countries is that we import a lot of our goods. You want a laptop? Laptop comes from abroad. You want forms of some fruit that we can locally grow ourselves? We import it, even though we make it ourselves. It's really weird. Go to Woolworths on any day and you'll actually see quite a lot of imported fruit. But this is South Africa. We can grow pretty much anything you want.
But not only that, of course, the South African economy is broadly extractive. For the last 100 years, minerals have been plucked from the ground here and then sent overseas into products that we then import back into the country. But now, Byron, it's getting very difficult to get those minerals out of the soil. So we need to change the entire South African economy to one where we use those minerals locally in terms of refinement or manufacturing or things like that. The economy of South Africa is due for a major change, but we can't do that because, well, we are following rules based on Western emissions and the green agenda and all that sort of stuff. So there's no real sovereignty there now, is there?
A lot of the train structures in South Africa are designed to go from coal mines to ports, not actually to go from city to city in order to transport people. A lot of our train lines were designed to extract our goods to major ports for export. The reason that this becomes important, ladies and gentlemen, is that what you see is that when we transport our goods to a port to export, there is no way for us to transport those goods to a manufacturing hub to be produced. So why is that important? Well, train lines are screwed. So we can't really actually export our stuff to the trains anymore. And as we know, what that means is that all of the minerals go on the back of a lorry. So it causes major problems for our roads. The ports themselves are getting congested because a lot of the goods aren't leaving the country at a fast enough rate. All of this retards developments in the country. We have a massive unemployment rate, and it would be far more logical for us to restructure our economy so that rather than export the minerals, what if we actually just had the manufacturing plant here, employed locals, reduced unemployment, and actually manufacture something that was proudly made in South Africa? Well, the speech argues that that's exactly what we should be doing.
And we agree with that completely. But what about the monetary system, Byron? Because if you read the speech, and I will quote, the dominant Bretton Woods system and its subsequent neoliberal order have been based on rules that were not only imposed on us, i.e. South Africa, but have also been strictly applied only to the extent that they benefit Western corporations, regardless of the immediate and or future detriment of developing countries. Now, this needs a bit of explanation. When the Soviet Union fell, all sorts of American consultants rushed to Moscow in 1991. And what did they recommend as a new way to do the economy? They recommended privatization of all state enterprises, lowering taxes, austerity measures, and all the rest of it. What happened to Russia in the decades subsequent to that? Massive unemployment, massively declining life expectation, middle-class women prostituting themselves on the street just so they could feed their children, and of course the creation of the criminal oligarchy class. That was Russia under Boris Yeltsin, and it took someone like Putin to undo all of that. And that's what she means by the neoliberal order, the imposition of rules that don't apply to the context of the country.
Well, actually, it's a lot easier to understand than you may think. So what effectively it meant is that America went there and said, hey guys, we need a currency backed by gold. And this currency based by gold could be used in order for us to all set our inflation rates and our economic targets and exchange rates through. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a dollar because the dollar is backed to gold. And you all want gold, right? So let's do that. But then America dropped the gold standard and kept the dollar standard. And all of the global institutions have continued to align with the dollar, even though the dollar isn't backed by gold. So effectively, the Americans set the value of their own currency and everybody else has to follow. So why is that important? Well, if I'm an American and I tell you, well, your Russian ruble that was worth 2 rubles to my $1, it's now worth 200 rubles to my $1, you don't really have much of a choice in the say of what happens there. That ultimately leads to currency depreciation, which leads to hyperinflation in terms of pricing in your country. Hyperinflation leads to loss of wealth. Loss of wealth leads to businesses collapsing and so forth. You can see how this all occurred. Now, according to this speech, the IMF, the World Trade Organizations, the World Banks, all of them still use the dollar as the standard. The dollar still being set by the American Reserve Bank means ultimately, by de facto, the Americans have a say on the global monetary policy.
So basically, this speech says quite a few things that we like. It talks about sovereignty. It talks about the history of the BRICS countries and how long that history has been. It talks about the neoliberal world order, which we are living under since 1990. And then in conclusion, the speech says, well, multipolarity has to be a thing. We have to live in a multipolar world because that is the only thing that will make us sovereign as people and sovereign as nations that are able to cooperate together, which is, well, right up our alley, Byron. I mean, I can't disagree with anything in the speech whatsoever.
No, in fact, one of the most surprising things about this speech is that the person actually says you need to go out of your way to learn each other's language. At the end of the day, it's a new world. You have the internet. What's your excuse for not learning about each other's cultures and your way of being? Keep your cultures, keep your way of being, but respect other people's cultures, respect their language. Learn to live in a multipolar world. You don't all have to be the same. You should embrace your differences. We agree with that, because if you apply that into the South African context, Afrikaners can keep their culture and keep their language. The Zulus can keep their culture and their language. The Anglos can keep their culture and their language. It's very surprising to see this kind of rhetoric coming out of the individual that actually gave the speech. But it's a very refreshing speech, and a speech that really resonates with the modern world. So, ladies and gentlemen, you may ask, who is this super based person? Who wrote the speech? Who gave it? Who is saying these shocking revelations? Well, Ramon, who was it?
It was none other than Koptuk herself, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma.